7 years ago, I was drowning in clutter. The amount of stuff in our home was causing me constant stress and frustration. Since then, I have decluttered 50% of our belongings and gone on to declutter for countless families who are also looking to eliminate clutter and find more peace in their homes. One of the things we consistently hear from clients is the struggle to let go of certain items because of the guilt. In today's video, I'm sharing the exact strategies that I used to overcome the constant guilt I was feeling about letting go of things, including practical, actionable steps that you can use in your decluttering journey starting today. As anyone who's ever struggled with clutter knows, the guilt is coming from all angles. Even our most ruthless, practical, objective clients still struggle with this. I'm gonna touch on the 4 most common types of guilt that we see with clients and explain exactly how I deal with each one. Potentially the number 1 category of things that we declutter from homes are gifts that people didn't want or couldn't use. The key way I deal with guilt over gifts is with a simple mindset shift. I remind myself that the joy is in the giving. There's a 99% chance that the person who has gifted you these items has completely forgot they existed. They probably loved picking them out, shopping for them, or creating them. A lot of them are handmade gifts, and they probably enjoy that whole process. They were so excited to give it to you. They loved watching you open it. And then the second it was over, they got in their car, started driving home, and were thinking about what was for dinner, whether it was gonna rain, and if they have time for a walk. They are no longer thinking about that gift. We deal with this consistently in our own home, especially when the kids were really little. We got a ton of gifts. And I try to consistently share examples of this in my videos because I know it is such a hot topic. For example, my mom makes a lot of dresses for my 7-year-old daughter, Annie Rose, and some of them we adore and she wears all the time and we love them. And there's other ones that she just refuses to put on, or they're not her style, or she just doesn't like the fit of them. And those ones we consistently get rid of instantly. I remember reading a long time ago that humans give gifts of what they actually truly want to receive. And I remind myself of this every time I'm getting rid of a gift. Also, a behind the scenes tidbit from a professional organizer: everyone declutters their gift. It would be very rare for someone to have enough space to keep every gift they've ever received. Like, we have to declutter our gifts. So if you feel like you're being sneaky or you're the only one doing it, that is definitely not the case. Guilt category number 2 is over money spent. So we all know the sunken cost fallacy, where we continue to hang on to items that long after they have become functional or useful for us, simply because we spent money on them. Even though we rationally know that this is irrational, it's a really tough thing to break. I have 3 simple strategies I use for when I'm dealing with this type of clutter. The first one is another mindset shift, where I basically think of everything as I own as something that I am just borrowing or renting. And therefore, the money that I've paid for this item is simply a rental fee. And not in a hyper consumerism wasteful way, but in a life changes and I am grateful to own it right now while I do. When I'm done with something, I'm happy to pass it along. It doesn't cause me a lot of stress because I know it was always just a rental to me. I will actually sometimes break down the per use fee on something, and if it's something that I've consistently been using for a long time, it is typically pennies. A recent example was that a few years ago, I rented an off-site space to do work in. And then last year, I ended up not needing it anymore. And so everything I had purchased for that space, I now had to bring home. One of these things included a small little blanket or throw that I had in the corner on a chair, and I loved it, and it was perfect. But I brought it home and I tried to use it in our space, in our living room. And a couple months later, I'm like, you know what? This just isn't working. I really don't need it. And I put it in our donate pile. The decision was so much easier knowing that I had always just purchased that item as a rental. I think I paid $10 for it and I used it for over a year, which really is actually a pretty decent deal. When we remind ourselves that the money we spent on something is really just a rental fee, it becomes so much easier to let go. My next strategy for dealing with guilt over money spent is simply selling stuff. I don't do it with everything. However, sometimes even just to the attempt or trying to sell something eases something in our minds. And I totally get this because just last week from my spring declutter haul that I shared, I actually ended up listing 3 items. There were 3 pieces of clothing I had bought for my kids that they had like rarely used or very infrequently used. And it just irked me that they never got used. And so I posted them and listed them, and Honestly, I have not got a single bite, so there's a good chance I'll end up having to donate them. But there is just something about listing them that made me feel better. And if you're thinking, but Marianne, I spent $400 on this winter coat and I ended up hating it and I couldn't return it and I can't sell it, then what do I do? This is where I use my mindset shift called learn from my mistakes, which is to remind myself that this purchase was a valuable lesson and to not do it again and to give myself grace. We all want to consume mindfully and intentionally, and I strongly believe we get better and better at it with practice. But I also strongly believe that we're humans and humans make mistakes, and that is okay. Guilt category number 3 are sentimental items. This includes things like photos and keepsakes, and sometimes it's our own and sometimes it's items that we are keeping for someone else, like childhood items for our kids when they grow up, or items that we've inherited from friends or family that have passed away. I have 3 quick and dirty strategies that I use when dealing with keepsake clutter. First one is I imagine it in 20 years. Will it still bring me joy in 20 years? Will I still love looking at it? Will it still mean anything to me? For example, when my dad died, he left a bunch of these corporate stamps, and his work was a big part of his life. And I spent my childhood seeing these in his offices, and they were like special to me and very meaningful to me. However, I think he had like 8 or 10 or 12 of them. And honestly, some of the company names I didn't even recognize. They were even before my time. So I know that in 20 years, I don't need to hang on to 20 of them. I found the one that was probably the most meaningful or special to me. I gave a few to my brother, and then I think I might have just donated or tossed the rest. Strategy 2 is creating physical boundaries. So creating an area where this is where your keepsakes are, and this is how much we can keep, and this is the limit. I have an entire video just on physical boundaries and how it saves us on a daily basis. For our family, my husband and I each have one bin for our keepsakes, and that is that. And I actually went one step further, and within my bin, I have this smaller little container, which I'm pretty sure I've had since like 1995. And this holds all of like greeting cards that I've kept, or letters or notes, little small things like that. And this is how much I can keep. This is the limit. I don't need or want any more than this many cards or greeting cards. My last strategy for dealing with keepsake clutter is practice. Practice, practice, practice. You will get so much better, I promise. We will often work with clients, and like in that first like hour or 2, it's all really sticky. You can tell they're just not confident. And then by hour 3 or 5 or day 2, they are making decisions quickly and confidently. And it is so inspiring to watch. Guilt category number 4 is guilt around being wasteful from like an environmental standpoint. So not wanting to throw things out because they could be useful in the future, and or we're worried that they're just going to end up in the landfill for the next 500 years. The number 1 thing I do to reduce this guilt is I buy used. That's it. It's not a perfect solution, but it has changed our consuming habits so drastically and has almost completely reduced my guilt over feeling wasteful when I'm decluttering. When we are done with something and we pass it on, I know that typically it has already lived a life before us or multiple lives before us. And in my hopes, it's going to continue to live another life with another family. In 2022, we actually did an entire buy nothing new year, where for 12 months, we purchased nothing but secondhand items. Ever since then, it has become second nature. It's so easy. We are just so used to it now. Like I mentioned, this is obviously not the perfect long-term solution, but focusing on using items that already exist in our world is a great first step. Most importantly, I encourage you to give yourself grace. If you are watching this video and you're struggling with the guilt over decluttering, keep working, keep trying, keep going, it gets easier. If you are working on decluttering, check out my most recent video where I share the 5 most common mistakes that people make that leads them to end up quitting and what to do instead.